bit about then Christian civilization. We met at the
Mhm.
ARC conference,
Mhm.
which I think, especially for the first one, I'm still on the fence in terms of whether or not I'm going to go back. Not because I have anything against it, but it's much more a sense of time and money.
Mhm.
Is this worth my investment in that?
Right.
And that's not necessarily even the big question of Christian civil is Christian civilization worth my investment? No, I'm a selfish prick. I'm going to just invest in myself. Um, and even what we're talking about when we're trying to talk about that, and I mean, the first art conference was a big room with a pretty standard thing where you have high status speakers and all of us listening, and then little reception spaces outside.
Mhm.
And for me, I thought, is this what it's sort of like I will be a bad Protestant, sort of like a Protestant church approach to the world. If we just put
Yeah.
people in a room and keep sending straightforward messages at them, then they'll
Right.
go out and do
The
what,
things we want.
yeah,
Hmm.
but we're not even quite clear on whether the things we want actually result in the outcomes we desire, because for the most part, we're not even sure of the outcomes we desire. It's usually just these little A/B testing. We want this and not this, this and not this, instead of,
Hmm.
I mean, a civilization is a extremely nuanced set of choices that are usually in tension but yet overlapping. And that's part of why I think what you do as a novelist and as you're not writing science fiction or fantasy or completely off-world things. You're writing contextual fiction within rather sacred moments civilizationally.
Yeah.
And then Paul Kingsnorth, who wasn't at the first art conference,
Don't think he'll ever go.
well, what was so funny
Doubt
is
it.
that I'm gonna try and not have too many people click off the conversation at this point. But there were a group of us that sort of, after a couple of speeches there, sort of huddled in the back and said, "What did we agree to come to? And do I want my picture taken here?" Um,
Exactly. Am I
and and
co-signing onto this?
and so it was refreshing to at least find a little tribe in tension in the place. But
Hmm.
yet, if now that we've expressed the tension and the dissonance that we felt at certain moments, and not at all moments, because there are other
Right.
moments in which I very much felt at home. But
Yeah.
again, in any civilization, you're going to have this. I thought Jonathan Peugeot's speech was really wonderful. I thought that was a defining moment of
Yeah.
the entire event. But but that brings up, and then Paul Kingsnorth, of at all places, behind a podium that says first things, which, if anybody sort of has a known about how that whole thing has sort of developed over time, we're in this strange moment civilizationally where we've really sort of put on the pit helmets with the searchlights and gone down into the roots of the building and are looking around and saying, now, what exactly are we doing here, and what are we attempting to build, or what do we want to get outside of? Well, talk a little bit about Ark and King's North, and that's
Hmm.
sort of what occasioned this.
Yeah. So I know Paul a little bit. I know Martin Shaw a little bit better. We're collaborating
And
on
Martin
a
was at
project.
the conference.
Martin was, yeah. So I love that you sort of found your home at the artist table, Paul. That was fantastic. Yeah, you fit right in. It's great. But yeah, there was a certain point at which we collectively, as a group of artists, bailed and went and found like what was it called? The Blackfriar. There was it's like a old pub, very much out of the Hobbit kind of thing. Um, because at a certain point you reach a saturation point where it's like, okay, I either get and co-sign onto the vision here, or I'm not quite sure where we're going yet, and we need to kind of like break down into our smaller component and go and talk about it amongst ourselves. And that's kind of what happened. And that's what I hope will happen in the future. I'm not sure what's the format of the next conference. I am probably going to go because I kind of want to see this thing through. Just see what they're going to do next. I think that the artists, it's so interesting to me because for many, many years, so after my husband left ministry, um, we just sort of fell out of the Christian world culturally, completely. We really didn't have a foot in it at all. And so kind of coming back around now after these years of doing novels and saying, wait a minute, like why don't the Christians know who I am? I'm like, on the same team. And I feel like there's some, I have work that can help people kind of navigate. But nobody in this particular sphere, really knows what I do yet. It's changing. I just spoke at the Touchstone conference. So it was a keynote there. So that was kind of like, wow, this is a different room than I'm used to. But the talk that I gave at the Touchstone conference was about the demise of Christendom and how we should just let it go.
Hmm.
Like, it's fine. We're going to be all right, you know? Um, and sort of breaking down a little bit of that language of what is Christianity, what is Christendom, and is that the same thing as the life that Jesus called us to, um, in following him. I feel like I'm saying in terms of a lot, and I feel like I'm hypersensitive to that now. That a lot of people were talking about Kamala's use of that
Oh,
of filler words like that. So forgive me if I do, but um, so I think that as a historical writer and as an artist observing human nature and people's choices at interesting times of history, I don't have a I don't have an interest in preserving a shell of something like a container called Christendom. I'm not really interested in that because I think that the faith that we ascribe to transcends those containers. It's meant to fill all containers and is its own container, but it's the ones that we create are not really precious to me, if that makes sense.
so there's so part of what I'm seeing in even this moment with, let's say, well, we've already mentioned Kamala. Now we can talk about the Don, which
Oh
is so
no!
funny
And
because,
can I just? But I have to preamble any mention of anything political by saying I am an independent. I have no loyalties. I have never belonged to a political party and I never will. Okay, go.
well, and you, I talked a little bit about the tensions between pastors and artists, and in many ways, this is just another fractal of that tension between pastors and artists,
Okay.
because pastors have to be inherently political because, and I don't mean political in terms of national politics, I
Mhm.
mean political in terms of what politic is,
Yeah,
because to actually keep a church together, there is definitely a political aspect to keep a church
sure.
together.
Yeah.
Because there are always tensions within any community, and pastors sort of try to, okay, but we do have a budget and we do have goals. And so pastors are always sort of this thing. And what's super interesting to me about this moment now is the role that, let's say, orthodoxy is playing,
Hmm.
because orthodoxy for many of us is sort of a new revelation, even though it's been around a very long time, obviously.
Right.
And
Some might say.
so what's interesting, and I've noticed the same tension within Catholicism too, because the Roman Catholic Church is this massive thing in which there is almost everything somehow still within a hierarchy. The Orthodox, it's a little less so, in terms of a giant container in the way that the Roman Catholic Church
Mhm.
is a giant container. But when orthodoxy, I mean, I've had sort of a front row seat in watching the revelation of orthodoxy post 2016 in America,
Mhm.
and I know many have come in earlier. Orthodoxy has seemed to both attract counterculturalists, which I would say Kingsnorth is very much on that. And I think you're right in terms of locating him as an artist. And I think that's part of the role of the arts is that the arts do have a prophetic voice within a culture,
Yeah.
and they have long served that function. And in some ways, many artists really, when they find artists working for the state, let's say you look at Nazi art, or Jordan Peterson, of course, was collecting this Russian art.
Hmm.
When in many ways you sort of had art as propaganda,
Hmm.
and you know unapologetically propagandist.
Hmm.
And then there's this other element of artists who are sort of temperamentally countercultural. And when I say countercultural, even of the small culture, which is exactly why pastors and the artists that they are trying to, that they desperately need because they're giving their church life, but they're in deep frustration with, because what the pastor really wants is for the artist to submit to the
Yeah.
pastor's vision for their local
Yes.
megachurch.
Hmm.
And then I thought, oh wow, Paul Kingsnorth is sort of bringing this out with all sorts of dissonances here in internet land. And again, I saw the ARC conference as very much having all of those same tensions in them.
Hmm.
So what is it? What is going on in Orthodoxy? Because some of you want to found a new Constantinople, and a whole other group of you are like, no, that whole city founding, no. So, oh, great! I love when pets come into the
It's my
story.
studio assistant.
Great.
Yeah.
So, have any thoughts on that? Do you know what I'm saying, or am I just
Oh, I
kind
have
of
lots of thoughts
blathering?
on this. Yeah, so I will say, okay, from my own experience, it was always very uncomfortable as an artist in a Protestant church that was not avowedly iconoclastic, but there were so many people within the church that had a problem with images being in the church at all,
Yeah.
unless it was graphic design or slides. But the minute that any of us wanted to, let's say, illustrate a Bible scene or, you know, do an installation, something like that, people would really balk at it because a lot of them were coming from Catholic backgrounds. And so it was all just mushed up in sort of a negative experience for them, or they had been taught that this was idolatry or any number of things. And so along the way, I've met so many artists who feel that they have to make this choice between art and faith as if these two things are at odds. And I've never understood that. And I've tried to be compassionate about it. And I've since come to realize that I think that this is a uniquely Protestant problem. And this issue does not exist in the Orthodox Church. Now, I'm not an Orthodox supremacist. I'm quite ecumenical in my Christianity. Um, but I think that yeah, there were several babies thrown out with the bathwater in the Reformation, and this is one of them. Like our very damaged relationship to art. But I put this in a little bit of a historical context too, because the Reformation came right out of the plague. So this is the benefit to having written a book about the plague as well, because I see all those dynamics and what came before. And so the kind of deconstruction of that pre-plague world that was so enchanted and so visually rich to a world where like the presuppositions had been demolished, people's and so okay, well, if the thing that comes through that's the stabilizing element is this book of words with no pictures, and we can endlessly reproduce this book of words, well, then the imagistic becomes very suspect in that kind of paradigm. And believe me, I'm a Bible girl. Like, I'm I'm as I lean, let's say, within Orthodoxy, and forgive me, if anybody's Orthodox watching, I
No, no
lean much
Orthodox
more.
watch my channel. Don't worry about it. Speak freely. No one will say a negative thing. Trust me on that.
I'm much more heavily sola scriptura. You know,
Boy,
although I,
you just are triggering all the stuff. You just like bang, 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 bang.
listen.
Ah,
What am I going to do?
keep going.
I've
Well, I know
I've
where you're
never
from. That's
look.
fine.
I've never done anything right in my life. Okay, and whether it's figuring out where the popular girls bought their clothes in middle school to doing my hair, like I'm sorry, I always get it wrong. So I figure I'm just gonna keep going with what I think, and then at some point maybe I'll get it right. I'm stumbling along. Okay. So yeah, so anyway, that's where I think a lot of this wrestling came from. And but the Orthodox Church, for all its flaws, and it has many, has produced some of the greatest works of genius, people like Dostoevsky and Arvo Pärt, and um, where there's a real sense in which the art that they're making is coming from a tradition of sensory beauty and like deep embodiment. We might even say incarnational embodiment. Um, and also that kind of realistic, coupled with that realistic view of human nature that Christianity offers. So I think there's opportunity there. And I've been watching this happen with the whole deconstruction movement over time. And a lot of it comes from these more, artistically sensible, these artistic sensibilities in the Protestant world. And having come into Orthodoxy, I think that people like you might find a home here that you might not have been able to find in the evangelical world. And um, because I'm deeply ecumenical in that way, I think there's a home for everybody. There really is a home for everybody. Um, and not to say that all the artists should leave the evangelical world and become Orthodox. That's not what I'm saying. But I think if it becomes this unnecessary tension between art and faith, just know that like this question has been wrestled with for, almost 2000 years. And like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Fair?
Yep.